Last night at his CNN town hall, Joe Biden was asked how he'll make student loan forgiveness of at least $50,000 happen. Here is his answer.
Good evening, Mr. President. Student loans are crushing my family, friends, and fellow Americans.
Me too.
The American dream is to succeed, but how can we fulfill that dream when debt is many people's only option for a degree? We need student loan forgiveness beyond the potential $10,000 your administration has proposed. We need at least a $50,000 minimum. What will you do to make that happen?
I will not make that happen. It depends on whether or not you go to a private university or a public university. It depends on the idea that I say to a community, I'm going to forgive the debt, the billions of dollars of debt for people who have gone to Harvard and Yale and Penn and schools. My children, I went to a great school, I went to a state school. But is that going to be forgiven rather than use that money to provide for early education for young children who come from disadvantaged circumstances? But here's what I think. I think everyone, and I've been proposing this for 4 years, everyone should be able to go to community college for free. For free. That costs $9 billion, and we should pay for it.
So here to discuss, friend of the show, co-host of Bad Faith Podcast, Briahna Joy Gray. Briahna, I just don't really understand how something can be legal at 10 but illegal at 50. Maybe you can explain that to me.
I cannot explain it to you, Saagar, because it doesn't make any sense. It's not true. Joe Biden has the authority to cancel all student loan debt. Look, here's what we're dealing with. The reason why so many students are able to take out student loan debt, despite being 18 years old and not having any credit history, is because our government decided that getting an education was fundamental not only to the individual welfare of Americans who are desperate to join the middle class, to lead successful, productive lives, but that it's essential for our entire American community. We need scientists, we need teachers, and we need these people to be able to join the workforce despite the fact that colleges routinely cost over $50,000 a year. And we're not talking about Harvard. We're talking about a broad swath of colleges, right? However, although the government has decided to take that gamble, it is now deciding that all of a sudden, that is some kind of risky behavior that shouldn't be rewarded, and characterizing, using the specter of the occasional Harvard student as an excuse not to cancel debt for the overwhelming majority of students that, of course, didn't go to college, didn't go to Harvard, rather. Mm-hmm. It is almost as though Joe Biden is trying to find the most unsympathetic character in the world to justify not pursuing a very sympathetic program, in much the same way as conservatives and some Democrats waved the flag of the welfare queen back in the 80s to try to get around the idea that for the common sense thinking person, giving money to help poor women and families is actually a good idea.
Yeah. The whole framing comes from this deficit hawk mindset. I mean, he presents this false choice of like, wow, if we spend it on college, we can't spend it on early childhood education. Well, why can't you do both? So there's that piece too. And then also what you're getting at here, which I think is really important, is part of how the stimulus checks debate has unfolded as well. Yes. There's this obsession among deficit hawks of like, we can't let one person who doesn't really need it get the $2,000 check, when it should be more focused on, look, it's more important to get help more broadly. And then if people need to be taxed on the other side, that's fine. But the danger is in doing too little and failing to help the people who really need it.
Yeah, and I'm sympathetic to the idea that, sure, some people certainly don't need their student debt canceled. But I want people to keep two things in mind. One is that affluent people don't take out student debt. Federal Plus loans, some of which I know all too well, are at an 8% interest rate, sometimes 8.5% interest rate, okay? No one voluntarily takes out money that they have to pay that much interest on if they don't absolutely have to. And the second point is that if you're truly concerned about people getting student debt cancellation who don't deserve student debt cancellation, if you're concerned about a windfall for the rich, I have a plan for you. Tax the rich. Claw that money back in taxes instead of trying to weave a Byzantine web of means testing that is ultimately going to leave people out. And the last point I would make on this is to say, if Joe Biden were really concerned about the wealthy getting too much money, he wouldn't have said during the primary, I don't think 500 billionaires are the problem. He wouldn't have said during the primary that he doesn't want to raise taxes, a penny of taxes for people who make $400,000 a year. This is very clearly kind of a cloak and daggers to get around doing what millions of Americans would like him to do in the middle of a crisis. Just like he has the authority to postpone payments on student debt the way he already has to stop people from having to pay, he absolutely has the authority to cancel all student debt. And the question that should be put to him is why on earth he won't do it.
You know, and it's interesting. I'm not on a policy front. I'm not 100% sold, especially in terms of a gift to some and, not to others, just on a practical front. But what I'm fascinated to hear from you, Brianna, is why are they hiding behind these procedural arguments? That's what I find crazy, which is like when it comes to the minimum wage, the same thing. They're like, oh, the Byrd rule says like you can't do it. And then they're like, oh, well, maybe we can do this one way or the other. Like, oh, I can do it at 10, but not at 50. It's like hiding behind procedure instead of making a policy case either for or against.
Yeah, well, I think Democrats have pinned themselves into a corner a little bit. Philosophically, the narrative that the party paints about itself is that it wants to help the down and out. It is the party that protects the downtrodden. It is the party that protects marginalized groups, the party of young people, the party of Black people and brown people and immigrants. And so when push comes to shove and it is becomes more apparent that what we really have in this country are two corporate parties, the Republicans can be a little bit more straightforward in their narrative. Their narrative says, hey, the free market will solve the problems. We're not doing a bunch of social engineering here. We think that the cream will rise to the top. Democrats don't have that option. So they have to come up with a justification for why they don't do the obvious thing that will help people according to their narrative. So why can't they just give people $2,000 or even better, $2,000 recurring payments? Why is it that now that all of this research shows that the best way to get people out of poverty is to simply give them money and all the means testing isn't effective, don't they just do that? Well, there has to be some rationalization about how Republicans won't let us or Joe Manchin won't let us, or when those things fail, there's some logistical reason why we can't do it. And they get away with it again and again because for the most part, the corporate media allows them to and never simply asks Joe Biden or the people who represent him the simple question. We know this works. You absolutely have the authority to do this. Why do you keep lying to the American people about it?
Yeah, the one thing they are really expert at is coming up with excuses for why they can't do things, especially things that are wildly popular with the country at large, but especially with the Democratic base. Brianna, always great to have you. Thank you.
Thanks, Brianna.
Thank you both.
Coming up, the New York Times' Jane Coaston is going to talk about why conservatives are fighting over Senator Mitt Romney's child allowance proposal. That's when Rising returns.